Hey everyone, welcome back to our Intro to Web Dev course. In Lesson 3, we're going to be talking more about CSS, including responsive web design, Flexbox, grid, and some other things. So first, let's start out with responsive web design. Responsive web design pretty much means that a website can look good on multiple different screen sizes, including a mobile device, a laptop, a TV, or any other device. And you make a website responsive by using CSS media queries. So let's go back to our Intro to Web Dev course file, and let's go ahead and create a new page called responsiveness.html. And now let's just go ahead and type exclamation mark for our HTML boilerplate. And now that we have that little template going on, let's go ahead and create a div, and inside that div let's put an h1 tag, and let's say this is my first website that uses responsive web design. Now, just like we did in the previous lesson, we want to link our styles sheet to this page, so we can go ahead and copy this code and put it inside the head of this code so that in responsiveness.html it links that CSS file. Now let's go ahead and run the code to see what it looks like. And as you can see, it applied the styles from the previous lesson, including the gray background and the green text. For now, let's go ahead and remove that CSS so we can mess around with responsive styles. So let's get rid of this color green and the background color gray. Now it should just be that. Let's go ahead and remove the border too. Okay, cool. So now we can start writing our CSS media queries, and pretty much how this works is it starts out with an @ symbol, and then you type media screen, and right after screen you're going to want to type and max width 600 pixels. And let's go ahead and select something like our h1 tag, and let's go ahead and set the font size to 12 pixels if it is below 600 pixels. And let's go ahead and set the default font size to 40 pixels. And let's go ahead and try resizing this website. And so, as you can see, as soon as I pass the 600 pixel mark, it decreases the font size. And as you can see, it decreases like that. And just a quick reminder, when you're working on websites in Safari, you always have this enter responsive design mode. The same thing is in Chrome and other things, or you can just inspect and then you can resize it like that. So it's pretty easy to mess around with. So I recommend that you get a hang of this sort of media query style, as you'll be using it a lot. So let's go ahead and delete this font size 40 pixels. And it defaults to the normal h1 font size. And then what if we were to change this max width to a minimum width by doing min? Now let's go ahead and resize it, and as you can see, when it drops below 600 pixels it defaults to the normal h1 font size, but when it is above 600 pixels it is the normal media query font size, which we set to 12 pixels right here. Let's go ahead and create a style, and then inside this inline CSS, let's go ahead and write background color equals bisque. And so as you can see, it changes the background color to bisque. Now, what if we wanted to change the background color when it's below 400 pixels? So let's go ahead and go back here. And before we go back to our styles sheet, let's go ahead and give it a class name of container responsive. Let's make a new selector right here, container responsive, our brackets. And let's go ahead and put all of this code inside a media query. So let's go ahead and do that @ media screen, and let's put it inside there. And just like we did before, let's do and max width 500 pixels. So when it is below 500 pixels, this CSS will be taking in place. So let's go ahead and set the background color to aqua when it is below 500 pixels. Let's go ahead and set the max width to 200 pixels. And so actually, instead of doing inline CSS, let's go ahead and copy this code and delete this inline style tag and just create a new thing in this called container responsiveness. And as you can see, the background color is still bisque, but when you resize it, it changes to aqua. Now what if we wanted to add some padding too? Let's go ahead and add padding of 1 rem. Now see, it starts to look a little nicer. Let's add a margin of 1 rem. And it looks even nicer. So now that we're done with responsive designs, go ahead and mess around with this, mess around with max width, min width, and see how your code changes based off of the amount of pixels you declare and your properties that you're declaring inside this selector. So now let's move on to something called flexbox. Flexbox simplifies complex layouts for a row or a column, and it aligns items dynamically. So if it's on a smaller screen, for example, you would want to put it in a column usually, and if it's on a bigger screen, you would want to put it on a row. So all of these properties and techniques in CSS work together: responsive design, flexbox, things like grid. You're going to need to know all of them to make a proper website. So inside responsiveness, let's go ahead and create another div, and let's call the class name called container. Inside container, let's create another div, and let's put this class as card. And inside card, let's have an h1 element that says this is my first card. And let's go ahead and copy that and change this to this is my second card. Now let's go ahead and see how the code looks. Let's exit responsive design, and first of all, let's remove our h1 font size query so that it looks a little more normal. And as you can see, it looks something like that. So if you notice, these two cards are put in a column, and to visualize this more, we can go ahead and do card background color blue. And as you can see, it changes the background color to blue. Let's go ahead and choose a little nicer color, and let's go ahead and select the color to white. And now let's go ahead and set the padding of this to 2 rem just to make it look a little better. Now let's go ahead and set the margin to 1 rem so it gives a little gap in between the different cards. Now let's say, what if we wanted to align these cards side by side instead of in a column? We would use something called display flex. And so how this works is we are encasing all of these cards inside this class name container. So let's go ahead and create a container selector, and inside this, let's go ahead and use a property called display, and let's set it to flex. And as you can see, it displays it as a flex. Now what if we wanted to automatically space this so that it fits the entire screen? We can use something cool called justify content space between. And as you can see, it spaces it evenly. What if we were to add more cards to this? Let's see how it reacts to the code. This is my third card. This is my fourth card. And as you can see, it's all spaced out very well. And this technique is used a lot in HTML. Now let's go ahead and combine both of these ideas of responsive design and flexbox. Let's go ahead and enter responsive design, and as you can see, these cards don't look very well. So what if we wanted to space it out as a column instead of a row? We can simply do @media screen, and let's do and max width is, let's say, 600 pixels, and inside this, let's go ahead and select container, and we want container to display as a block instead of a flex. And as you can see, it displays as a column now, so it changes from a row to a column. Pretty neat. So now let's move on to the last topic of this lesson, which is a grid. A grid provides a two-dimensional layout, perfecting and creating a complex responsive design. So to do this, we can go ahead and delete our container code, and we're going to restart our container. So let's go ahead and do container called display grid instead of display flex, and let's see how it looks first. It's just normal like before. Let's go ahead and set the grid template columns to auto 1 FR. So an FR is essentially a fractional unit, and you can think of it as a measure of specifying how many columns or rows you want to have. And so this is going to create 2 columns and 2 rows. So just for testing purposes, let's go ahead and get rid of this margin of 1 rem for each card, and as you can see now there's no gap. Now what if we wanted to implement some gap? We can go ahead and use something called grid gap, and let's set it to 10 pixels. And as you can see, it creates a little gap of 10 pixels for each little card. And so that covers the basics of grids, flexboxes, and a little bit about responsive designs. For a challenge, I want you to create a responsive card layout. On smaller screens, display 1 card per row, and on larger screens, provide multiple cards and multiple rows if you can. Some hints are use the CSS grid for the card layout, or you can also use CSS Flexbox. Use media queries for responsiveness, and the solution is in the description down below. So once you're done, make sure to check it, and once you have mastered this concept, it gets a lot easier from here, and you'll be able to design a website much more efficiently and much more well. So in the next lesson, we're going to be talking a little bit about JavaScript for web development, and it is a pretty useful topic. So before that, just make sure that you master CSS queries, display flexes, flexboxes, and grids. So I'll see you then.